Now that you understand how TOGAF 10 governance controls risk, cost, and delivery without slowing teams, you need the next practical question answered. What should you actually produce? In the real world, enterprise architecture fails when you create too many artifacts that nobody uses, or when you create the wrong artifacts that do not support decisions. The architecture content framework in TOGAF 10 exists to help you produce the right evidence at the right time so leaders can make confident decisions and delivery teams can execute with clarity. This lecture helps you build a content mindset that is outcome driven, decision centric, and respectful of delivery pace. Building on the need for practical content, you should confront a hard truth. Many architecture teams confuse activity with value. When you produce more artifacts than the organization can consume, you create noise, not clarity. People stop reading, stop trusting, and stop involving architecture early. Excess artifacts also create maintenance debt because outdated models become misinformation. TOGAF 10 does not reward you for producing everything. It helps you tailor what you create based on the decisions required, the risk level, and the organizational maturity. Your goal is not to fill repositories. Your goal is to enable decisions and reduce rework, and content should serve that goal. With that reality in mind, you can treat the architecture content framework as a decision support system. It helps you describe what to capture, how to structure it, and how to keep it consistent across initiatives. It gives you a vocabulary for artifacts, deliverables, and building blocks. So your architecture practice is not reinventing outputs every time a new program starts. Most importantly, it helps you create traceability. So you can show how strategy connects to target direction, how target direction connects to roadmaps, and how roadmaps connect to delivery work. In leadership terms, the framework helps you create evidence that stands up in governance, audits, and executive reviews without forcing you into unnecessary documentation. Now that you understand its purpose, you need a rule that keeps you disciplined. You should create an architecture artifact only when it changes a decision, accelerates alignment, reduces risk, or prevents rework. If the artifact does not do one of those things, you should question why you are creating it. This rule protects your time, protects delivery flow, and increases trust in the architecture function. It also aligns to TOGAF 10's modern intent, which is to make architecture more consumable and modular. When you apply this rule, you stop building architecture museums and start building decision evidence that the organization can act on. With the decision rule in place, you need to use TOGAF language consistently so teams know what you mean. An artifact is a specific piece of architecture content, such as a capability map, a value stream view, a data ownership view, or an integration view. A deliverable is a package output that is formally reviewed and communicated to stakeholders, such as an architecture definition document or an architecture roadmap. A building block is a reusable component, such as an identity service pattern, an integration approach, a reference architecture, or a shared platform service. When you separate these concepts, you reduce misunderstanding because people stop arguing about what format something must take and start focusing on what decision it supports and whether it can be reused. Now that your language is clear, you can simplify content into 3 practical categories. First, decision content, which supports trade-offs and governance such as principles, standards, target direction statements, and key architecture views. Second, alignment content, which helps stakeholders share the same mental model, such as capability maps, value streams, and target operating model views. Third, execution content, which translates direction into an actionable plan, such as roadmaps, work packages, and transition architectures. If you keep your content focused on these 3 categories, your architecture becomes immediately useful because it supports decisions, builds alignment, and drives execution. With those categories established, you can apply a minimum set of content that works in most real initiatives. You need a clear architecture vision because without it, teams will optimize for local delivery and drift from enterprise direction. You need a capability and value stream view because that anchors change on outcomes rather than on technology preferences. You need a target architecture direction statement because teams need guardrails and standards early. You need a roadmap and sequencing view because leaders need confidence that change is executable. And you need an exception and risk view because reality will force trade-offs and you need transparency. This starter pack is powerful because it is not heavy, but it covers the leadership questions that always appear in enterprise change. Now that you know the starter pack, you should be clear about what to skip unless there is a strong reason. You should skip overly detailed models that do not inform a decision, such as exhaustive application interaction diagrams that nobody will maintain. You should skip producing multiple versions of the same view for different audiences when a single well-crafted narrative view would work. You should skip documenting the current state in extreme detail when the organization only needs enough current state to identify constraints and risks. You should skip artifacts that duplicate what product teams or engineering teams already maintain, unless you are adding enterprise level insight and governance value. Skipping is not laziness. It is leadership discipline that keeps architecture relevant. With the skipping mindset understood, you still need a practical approach to the current state because leaders often ask for it. The right answer is that you capture only as much current state as needed to understand constraints, risks, and critical dependencies. In a transformation program, you might need to know where sensitive data lives, what systems are business critical, and where operational fragility exists. You usually do not need to document every interface and every configuration. Your current state content should answer what is stopping us, what will break, and what must be protected. When your current state content answers these questions, it becomes useful and it avoids becoming a never-ending documentation project. Now that you have the right current state approach, you can treat target state content as directional guidance rather than a perfect blueprint. Leaders need target direction to fund and prioritize. Delivery teams need guardrails to design within. Governance teams need standards to assure compliance. Your target state content should clarify platform choices, integration patterns, data ownership principles, security expectations, and operational requirements. It should also acknowledge what is still uncertain and what will be refined later. This approach prevents the common failure, where target state diagrams look impressive but cannot be executed. Directional target state content builds confidence because it is realistic and tied to sequencing. With target direction established, you need to address the place where many roadmaps fail, the transition. A transition architecture describes an intermediate state the enterprise will operate in while moving toward the target. This is critical in real organizations because you rarely switch from old to new overnight. You often run hybrid states, parallel platforms, stage migrations, and gradual process changes. Transition architecture content helps leaders understand what will change first, what risks exist in the interim, and what dependencies must be managed. It also helps delivery teams coordinate across programs because everyone can see what state the enterprise is moving through and what constraints apply at each stage. Now that you understand transition thinking, you can focus on the content leaders care about most. The roadmap. A roadmap is not a slide with dates. It is a structured sequence of change that explains how outcomes will be delivered over time. Work packages describe what must be done, how it relates to other work, and what capability uplift it delivers. This is where architecture becomes an investment story because you connect initiatives to enterprise priorities and you justify sequencing based on risk, dependency, and value. When you produce strong roadmap content, you shift architecture from being an advisory function to being a strategic planning function that shapes funding decisions. With roadmap content in place, you can accelerate delivery by creating reusable building blocks rather than reinventing patterns in every program. Building blocks can be reference architectures, approved integration patterns, identity and access approaches, data platform patterns, and operational monitoring standards. When you provide reusable building blocks, teams move faster because they have a proven path. You also reduce risk because building blocks embody standards and controls that have already been reviewed. In TOGAF 10 terms, building blocks turn governance into enablement because compliance becomes easier when standard solutions are readily available. Now that you have the content approach, imagine you are supporting a digital customer platform program. You would start with a clear architecture vision that ties the platform to measurable outcomes, such as improved customer onboarding speed and reduced service cost. You would create a value stream view for customer onboarding and service requests so stakeholders see where friction exists. You would create a capability map to show which enterprise abilities need uplift, such as customer identity management and communication orchestration. You would provide target direction for identity and access, data ownership, integration patterns, and operational monitoring. You would define transition states, such as running legacy systems in parallel while gradually moving customer journeys. Finally, you would produce a roadmap that sequences foundational platform capabilities before high volume migration. Notice how every artifact supports a decision, alignment, or execution step, and nothing is created just to look complete. With the example clear, you need to protect your content from becoming outdated because outdated architecture is worse than no architecture. You avoid architecture rot by maintaining a small set of high-value artifacts that are updated as part of governance, rather than attempting to maintain a huge library. You also treat architecture content as a living asset tied to change cycles, meaning it is reviewed when major decisions occur, when standards change, or when significant risks are introduced. The goal is not perfect documentation, it is reliable guidance. When your content stays current, teams keep trusting it and leaders keep funding it. Now that you are thinking about sustainability, you should tailor content by changing the narrative, not by duplicating the entire model. Executives need outcomes, trade-offs, risk, and investment logic. Delivery leaders need sequencing, dependencies, and guardrails. Engineering teams need patterns and standards that enable fast design decisions. Governance teams need traceability, risk acceptance, and compliance evidence. You can often serve all these audiences with a shared set of core artifacts presented through different views and stories. This keeps architecture lean, consistent, and trusted while still meeting stakeholder needs. With audience tailoring clear, you can connect content back to governance because content is the fuel for governance decisions. Governance becomes faster when standards and patterns are documented clearly, when exceptions are recorded consistently, and when roadmaps show sequencing and dependency logic. Compliance becomes less painful when the required evidence exists in a stable, understandable form. This is why TOGAF 10 content guidance matters. It gives you a disciplined way to create just enough evidence to support risk control and accountability, while still keeping delivery moving. Content that is designed for governance reduces meeting time, reduces rework, and increases confidence. Let's now discuss the key takeaways from what you learned so far, so you can apply it immediately. You learned that the TOGAF 10 architecture content framework exists to help you create decision evidence, alignment views, and execution plans not to produce artifacts for their own sake. You learn the practical rule that keeps architecture lean. You create content only when it changes a decision, accelerates alignment, reduces risk, or prevents rework. You learn the difference between artifacts, deliverables, and building blocks, and how that language prevents confusion. You learned an effective minimum set of content that works in most initiatives, including vision, value stream, and capability views, target direction, transition states, roadmaps, and risk and exception visibility. You learned what to skip, including overly detailed models that create maintenance debt and do not influence decisions. You learned how to keep current state content focused on constraints and risk, how to keep target state content directional and realistic, and how transition architectures connect vision to delivery. Finally, you learned how reusable building blocks and tailored narratives help you govern risk and cost without slowing teams down. Now that you know how to use the TOGAF 10 architecture content framework to create the right artifacts and skip the waste, you are ready to make your architecture practice lean, credible, and outcome driven. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, share it with your architecture and delivery peers, and comment with the one architecture artifact you see most often in organizations that you believe should be skipped or simplified and why.